Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. Now, I'm always upfront with you guys. I feel like we're friends at this point. I like to keep it real with you. A lot of you know I have been struggling with my jaw since November of 2023, actually before that. I had a procedure in December to fix it. It worked for about 6 to 8 weeks. And then it got really bad, and it got really bad really quickly. So a few weeks ago, I went back in. I had a more invasive procedure where I had to get fully put under. I had to get everything kind of like reworked in the joint because basically, not to go into great detail, but like my joints are rubbing together. It's caused from severe TMJ, from stress, all the things. So they had to do more of an invasive procedure. I was told that the recovery would be maybe a week of swelling, and then I would kind of have to start like being gentle and not learning to talk again, but like figuring out how to speak again. As you can probably tell, it's still not back to normal. I am very, very swollen still. Under the makeup, I'm very, very bruised as well, but I'm still very swollen, and my nerves in the process have been bruised, particularly right here. Now, apparently, I'm not a doctor, but apparently it's my understanding that it takes maybe several weeks to, I think, even a month or so for nerves to kind of like wake back up, if you will, and to not repair themselves, but like get back to normal. So as I wait for that, my speech is still a little bit impaired as everything is kind of working its way back out. The good news is my joint luckily feels a lot better now, but there's still some other issues happening, obviously. So not just that reason, but also because the set behind me is going full under construction beginning today. The majority of the next couple of episodes will still be me, but we'll have more video, more images, more media related to the case on screen, because not only is my set going to be under construction, but also, as I'm sure you can understand, I'm a little self-conscious about everything going on with my jaw. But I felt like a lot of you have been with me since 2020. I feel like the majority of us, we all know each other. And so I just wanted to come on here and at least be transparent and honest with you guys. The good news is it's corrected as of now, and the pain is gone as of now. I can still speak, which is great. It just looks a little funky and sounds a little funky. It's getting better day by day, but it still sounds kind of like I have like marshmallows in the back of my mouth. But anyway, so that's what's happening now. I'm excited. We have our new merch officially launched, which, let me see, I can move my mic so you can see it. This is more of like, I guess you can't hear me. This is like a take on Country Club because we're going into spring summer, but you can see Crime Story Junkie, cute little shirt. We have this, we have some pullovers, we have hoodies, we have a bunch of stuff, so you can always check that out. It's at annieelise.com. So anyways, sorry for the long-winded intro, but again, I just wanted to, be honest with you guys so that there weren't a lot of questions and things like that. But let's go ahead and jump right into today's case. Okay, so you know how it feels when you're watching like a horror movie, a scary movie, and you can tell that one of the characters is about to die, but they don't realize that they're the ones in danger? Like when they're walking down a dark hallway or a shadow appears behind them and then lifts up the knife, something like that. It can be suspenseful and really hard to watch, and you know what's coming next. It's inevitable, but you can't do anything to change it, and it kind of just gets you on edge. That's why suspense works so well in movies. Well, that's also kind of how today's case feels, except, of course, instead of a scary movie, this is a true story. It's about a murder that was extremely predictable. See, all of the warning signs were there. Everyone, including the authorities, had the exact evidence they needed to intervene and stop this crime before it happened. But instead, this foreseeable, predictable murder still happened, and somebody lost their life in the process, despite every single indication that they didn't have to. There's a lot to go over, guys, so let's get right into it. Alright guys, so you have heard me talk about Beam Dream Sleep Tea. I use it religiously, but look, I am not one to gatekeep. So I know some of you are coffee drinkers. Even though I'm not, I discovered Beam Super Latte and had my husband try it, and he is obsessed. So not only is Beam helping you sleep, but they're also helping you stay awake. Now let me talk to you about Beam Super Latte. It is a delicious coffee alternative that improves your daily productivity and delivers sustained energy. It's packed with natural adaptogens, nootropics, and mushrooms, all to combat all of the downsides of caffeine, but it still delivers that sustained energy. It also tastes delicious. I've even tried it even though I'm not a coffee drinker, but my husband loves it and I think it tastes good, and I hate all coffees, all lattes, all the things. Super Latte is just like smooth, creamy, and it still has notes of the flavor that you're familiar with. The taste alone will definitely get you out of bed in the morning. There's also no jitters. It has that delicious taste. There's no added sugar, no artificial sweeteners. It's only 15 calories. It's also vegan, paleo, keto friendly. It is the best tasting coffee alternative. And not only are you wide awake like coffee, but it has 1/3 the amount of caffeine. So improve your productivity and cut down on caffeine with Beam's new Super Latte. It is a delicious and effective coffee alternative that is made to not only boost your daily productivity, but also give you sustained energy. Click my link below or scan the QR code on the screen and use code 10TOLIFE to get an additional 20% off at checkout. So whether you're drinking Beam to help you sleep or to help you wake up, sweet dreams or good morning. Tammy Jo Blanton was born on January 7th, 1968 in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Jeffersonville is a suburb outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and it's separated from the city by the Ohio River. Jeffersonville is known for its riverfront district, and people love to just spend time outside. They like canoeing, biking, walking, or having dinner at one of the very many restaurants in the area. So all of these activities and this atmosphere really made it an ideal place for families to settle down. And Tammy spent her whole life in Jeffersonville because she loved the area and she wanted to be close with her family, which really made sense because she had a reputation for being a truly caring, compassionate person who felt really close to her family, and she loved feeling like everybody around her was being taken care of. Tammy was gorgeous as well. She had honey blonde hair, a bright smile, and these really, really intense blue eyes. So her good looks meant that the guys were always interested in her. But while she dated throughout the years, she loved being independent, and she never married. She also didn't want kids of her own, so she decided to just be the cool aunt to all of her nieces and nephews. But overall, Tammy was just this carefree woman, and when she wasn't working, she really loved going out with her friends, getting drinks, and just having a good time. Now, by the time that she was in her early 20s, the only thing she really felt like she was missing out on was having a serious boyfriend. She didn't want to be alone anymore, and she wanted to find somebody who was fun, like her. Unfortunately, though, she had to wait a while to find that. Until she was 46, to be exact. Now, in the spring of 2014, Tammy finally found just what she was looking for. At a bar in Jeffersonville, she met a man named Joseph Oberhansley. He was a little quiet, but he was nice, and he was definitely fun. They would spend time together playing darts and talking, and the conversation just flowed so easily. And right off the bat, there was this sense of comfort between the two of them. They hit it off immediately, and afterward, Joseph and Tammy had a whirlwind romance. Now, Tammy was 13 years older than Joseph. She had also been by herself her entire life, so she never really outgrew or left that going out and partying stage of her life. Maybe this could be seen as, I don't know, a little immature, but she was always known as a free spirit. Plus, like I said, Tammy liked to take care of other people. So when she met Joseph, he mentioned that he had a pretty rough childhood and was still working on putting his life back together. And it seems like that was almost something that pulled Tammy in a little bit, pulled her toward Joseph. She wanted to help him. In general, she had this tendency to go for men that she wanted to, quote, fix. You know the type, and I think a lot of women try to do that. They're just nurturing by nature, and they do think that they're the ones who will be able to fix, people who are damaged or people who have problems. But aside from that, they really just got along well. It also helped that they liked doing the same things. They would spend their time together going out to bars, going on fun dates, or just hanging out at home. They really did have a lot of fun together, and they just loved being in each other's company. So even with the age gap, the 13-year age gap, they got along great. So much so that just a few months after they met, Tammy asked Joseph to move in with her, and he agreed. So now Tammy was over the moon. She felt like she finally had what she wanted, a serious relationship, and it was moving on to the next step. However, her friends weren't quite as excited for her. See, it turns out they really didn't like Joseph. They felt like he was really controlling because he wouldn't let her hang out with her friends. They'd ask Tammy to go out and she would say that she couldn't because Joseph wouldn't let her. It was as if he didn't want her hanging out with anybody except for him. It was like he was actively trying to pull Tammy away from other people in her life, kind of isolating her, and unfortunately we've seen that in a lot of relationships where there's an element of love bombing, then isolation, so that they have control, they have the upper hand. He even monitored her Facebook profile, and he would get in virtual fights with people who would post on her Facebook wall. And he didn't limit that kind of bullying behavior to social media either. He was straight up rude to all of Tammy's friends whenever they all went out together in person. But as bad as it all sounds, Tammy still gushed about how great Joseph was. At least she did at first. But as more time went on, the more she started letting little things slip out, like that even she thought he was a little too controlling, or how he seemed to be angry all the time, no matter what she did. Two of Tammy's friends from work noticed that she was gushing less about Joseph and now complaining more. And when they saw that he was fighting with people on her Facebook profile, they decided to look into him some more. Because come on, that's just plain weird behavior, a little alarming even. They couldn't stop Joseph from acting like a bully, but they could try to learn more about him and see if the behavior was actually out of character or not. So they went online and they did some digging, some sleuthing, if you will. So here's what we know now about the real Joseph. Joseph was born in 1981 in Utah. As a kid, he had been very sweet, very loving. He constantly hugged and kissed his mother. Joseph also had two siblings, one older, one younger, and his childhood was pretty normal, pretty happy. But then everything changed in June of 1997 when Joseph was 16 years old, because that is when his older brother died by taking his own life. Now, no one had suspected his brother would do something like that, so everybody was shocked. And Joseph took this loss especially hard because he had been really close with his brother. So hard, in fact, that he started spiraling. And then, about a month after his brother's death, his dad died from what local newspapers called a very suspicious overdose. Why the overdose was suspicious, we aren't entirely sure, but it's been said that his death also most likely was self-inflicted. Now, anybody would struggle to deal with that kind of loss. And again, Joseph was only 16 years old, not even an adult yet. His mental health took a sharp turn for the worse at that point, and he stopped being that happy and loving kid that he used to be. His personality did a complete 180. Now he was angry, spiteful, and unpredictable. Joseph experimented with hard drugs to escape, and mostly meth, and he also made comments about how much he hated his life and how there was no point in living. People who knew Joseph said that it was like he was trying to act like this tough guy from movies and from TV shows, all to just cover up how much he was really struggling. So needless to say, Joseph now had a terrible reputation. It was a reputation that stuck with him all the way until he was now 17 years old and started dating a new girl named Sabrina Elder. Sabrina's family knew about Joseph's drug use and his angry personality, so they did not approve of him dating Sabrina. In fact, when Sabrina's grandfather first met Joseph, he chased him off the lawn because he didn't want Joseph to have anything to do with her. But Sabrina kept seeing him, and eventually she got pregnant. So even with a baby on the way, Sabrina's family did not want to have anything to do with Joseph. So she ended up moving in with him and with his relatives, which meant that she was staying with Joseph, his mom, his little sister, and his grandma. Now, we know a lot of the time, teen romances, they aren't built to last, and it really didn't take long for Sabrina and Joseph to start fighting all the time. They broke up, but Sabrina kept living with Joseph so that it would be easier to parent together once the baby came. It's probably safe to assume that she wanted Joseph to be a part of their baby's life, but as it turned out, he didn't feel ready for fatherhood. He told his friends that he was dreading the birth. He also started spreading rumors that Sabrina slept around, and he wasn't even sure if he was the father. A couple of times, Joseph said that he wanted a paternity test. Now, I don't know if Sabrina ever actually cheated on him or if there were any grounds to those rumors, but I do understand how Joseph might latch onto that idea, because maybe he thought that a paternity test would get him out of a situation that he didn't want to be in. But aside from that, there was no excuse for some other things that he said, including that he wanted to kill Sabrina. Now, as alarming as that statement was, his friends didn't take it too seriously. Apparently, he only made those kinds of comments when he was high, so they wrote them off as not sincere, not really weighted, didn't really have much meaning. But either way, Sabrina gave birth to a baby boy on December 4th, 1998. They named him after his father, Joseph, and to avoid confusion, I'm just going to call him the baby, and the father will still be Joseph, okay? Just so that we can all follow and go clearly. Now, even after the birth, Joseph still was not interested in fatherhood, and he was getting into arguments with Sabrina over the paternity of the baby. At one point, their arguments got so bad that on December 8th, when the baby was only 4 days old, Sabrina had to call the police. She said that they had been arguing about who the baby's father was, that Joseph punched her, and then he ran away. Joseph was gone by the time the cops arrived, and they weren't able to find him. The next day, Sabrina was home with the baby and with the rest of the family. They were all sitting together when Joseph came home, and he was acting very, very strangely. It seemed like he was under the influence of something. He kept pacing in the hallways, acting upset, but nobody knew for sure what was bothering him. Then, all of a sudden, he pulled out a gun, and he started shooting wildly all over the place. His mother was the first person who figured out how to react. She grabbed the baby out of Sabrina's arms, and she made a run for it. But Joseph shot her in the back. She fell down, and Joseph's 13-year-old sister ran over to help. She took the baby out of her mother's arms, and she ran out the door, and luckily they both made it to safety. But now, Joseph was alone in the house with Sabrina. He shot her 5 times in the head, killing her instantly. Then, he turned the gun on himself and he pulled the trigger. Someone called 911, it's not clear who, and everyone was rushed to the hospital. Joseph's sister and the baby were unharmed since they hadn't been shot, and his mother managed to survive that gunshot wound to her back, miraculously. And then, in a total shock to everybody, Joseph also lived, even though he had shot himself in the head. The bullet ended up getting lodged in his frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that helps you think rationally and control your emotions. When the doctors saw his scans, they thought that somehow Joseph had come out more or less unscathed. It didn't look like the gunshot actually caused any major damage. In fact, if they did surgery to try to remove the bullet, they were more likely to injure him during the procedure. So instead, they left the bullet in his head. A month later, in January of 1999, once Joseph had enough time to recover, he was arrested and he was charged with Sabrina's murder. The police also pressed charges for attempted murder since he shot his mom. His bail was set at $1 million, and Joseph's family supported him. Even after everything he had done, his own mother, who he shot, still defended him. She said he acted the way that he did because he had been through so much with the death of his brother and his father. His grandparents also helped, and they were able to pay for a really good defense team. And his lawyers convinced the judge to let Joseph go without that much of an expensive bail payment. They argued that Joseph was just going through a hard time and he needed to be home so that he could heal with his family, which seems so bizarre to me because going through a hard time doesn't equate to trying to murder multiple people in your family and actually murdering the mother of your child. But shockingly, the judge actually agreed with them. So Joseph got to go home until his trial, all while remaining under house arrest the entire time. Now, he was supposed to face the jury in January of 2000, but a couple of things went down before his hearing could begin. First and foremost, Joseph's mother and sister refused to cooperate with the prosecution. His immediate family members also were fully prepared to defend Joseph, even though he literally shot at them. Their argument was that Joseph just wasn't the sort of person who commits murder. Instead, he just wasn't handling his brother and father's deaths well, and they also argued that the drugs had kept him from thinking straight. The prosecutors knew that if Joseph's sister and mother, his literal victims, weren't willing to take the stand against him, they would have a really tough time getting a conviction for first-degree murder. So instead, they made a plea deal with him, where Joseph could settle for manslaughter and attempted murder. And he accepted the deal. During his sentencing hearing in March, everyone repeated those same arguments again, that Joseph wasn't violent. He would never dream of hurting anybody if he wasn't high on meth. His lawyers actually pointed at the bullet in his brain as evidence that he was going to reform. They said that ever since he had shot himself, Joseph had now been very calm, very relaxed. and that he just didn't have it in him anymore to do something as dangerous again. They even compared the bullet in Joseph's head to a lobotomy. Now, if you don't know what that means, a lobotomy was a very popular neurological procedure in the 1940s and 50s. The surgery involved making holes in the skull to then cut the nerve connections between the frontal lobe and other parts of the brain. The idea was that the surgery would provide relief for people with various mental health issues like schizophrenia and OCD. However, that surgery has since been discredited because it was known to completely alter people's personalities. They would start behaving erratically and impulsively. In fact, damage to the frontal lobe can prevent rational thinking and increase irritability. So it didn't make sense that Joseph's lawyers were now making the argument that he was more calm. They never even had a doctor or a psychiatrist support these claims either. So in addition to all of this, Joseph also expressed remorse for what he had done. He said, quote, "I'd give my life for hers. I will take responsibility for my acts, not only today, but for every day until I die." So thanks to all of those arguments and Joseph's apparent regret, he was only sentenced to 15 years in prison. And understandably, Sabrina's family was furious about all of this. First, they didn't think that it was fair that Joseph had only been charged with manslaughter. Even if his mom didn't want to testify against him, that didn't change the fact that he had pointed a gun at Sabrina's head and he pulled the trigger 5 times. Plus, they did not believe a word of what Joseph's family said. They thought that he was very dangerous, and the murders were completely in character for him. They worried that once he went free at the end of his sentence, he would hurt somebody else. Sabrina's grandfather even told a reporter, quote, "He's going to get out in 5 to 7 years, and he's going to do it again." Now, he said 5 to 7 years even though Joseph was supposed to go away for 15, and I guess he had already mentally shaved off some time for parole, which was pretty straightforward thinking on his part because Joseph did have a parole hearing after a few years. Sabrina's family attended it, and they insisted that Joseph was not ready to return to freedom. Apparently, while he was in prison, he'd actually bragged about his crime, and he got a tattoo on his back that said, "Murderous Deeds." But a prison psychiatrist evaluated him, and the psychiatrist said he had changed and he no longer was a threat to society. They also said he never had any disciplinary problems during his incarceration, and his good behavior should count in his favor. So the parole board truly believed that Joseph had reformed, and they released him on July 12th, 2012. Now, even though he was released, they did warn that if he was caught breaking the law again, it would be considered a parole violation, and he would have to go back to prison in Utah. So upon release, now Joseph wasn't behind bars, and his whole family had moved out of state to Indiana. Since Joseph didn't know anyone in Utah anymore, he decided he was going to move to be closer to his mom, and he got permission to relocate without violating his parole. In theory, he was supposed to agree to some extra monitoring, and officials back in Utah would find out right away if he did anything that he wasn't supposed to. But there were a lot of steps. Joseph's parole officer in Indiana would have to hear about whatever he did wrong, then he would have to tell his parole officer in Utah, who would then tell the parole board. So it's really easy for little details to fall through the cracks. And that's exactly what ended up happening with Joseph. See, in March of 2013, Joseph met a woman at a bar. They flirted a little bit, then they went back to her place. They were right in the middle of having a good time, if you know what I mean, having sex, when a man suddenly burst into the apartment and started hitting Joseph with a baseball bat. Joseph tackled the man and then began strangling him. That's when the woman then called the police. When they arrived, Joseph was still naked, standing over this man with his hands still around the guy's neck. The man was barely conscious, but Joseph would not let go. His knuckles were swollen, they were bleeding, and he didn't stop until the police basically wrestled him off of this other guy. So then everybody gave their statements, which got pretty confusing because everybody's story was a little bit contradictory. The woman tried to say that Joseph followed her home and then broke into her apartment, but Joseph said that he was the victim in all of this, that the man and the woman brought him over so that they could steal his phone, his wallet, his car keys. So it's a pretty confusing story. What really happened here? Well, it turns out that the woman was cheating on her boyfriend, and then the boyfriend attacked Joseph because she was cheating. It isn't confirmed, but Joseph probably made up the story about how they wanted to rob him so that he could avoid getting in trouble for his violent behavior. Later on, the woman did confess that she willingly brought Joseph home. But even with her new admission, Joseph was eventually arrested, and he was charged with battery, strangulation, and resisting law enforcement. He was taken to jail, but his grandfather bailed him out for the low price of $1,000, which honestly, that was a steal given that he already had been convicted of manslaughter, and this was now the second time where he tried to kill someone. In fact, in theory, now that he had been arrested, Joseph should have automatically gone straight back to prison in Utah. He violated his parole, and his Indiana parole officer knew what had happened. But for whatever reason, they didn't say anything to the Utah authorities. Apparently, they were confused about whether Joseph was the victim or the perpetrator of the crime, which, okay, fair enough. The whole situation, it was super confusing. But when they couldn't get a straight answer from anyone, they decided just to not follow up or tell anybody about what went down. So Joseph got out and basically did not face any consequences. But then there was another incident a year later. The police tried to pull Joseph over in Indiana for driving recklessly. But instead of pulling over, Joseph kept going. And pretty soon, he was in a high-speed chase that took him all the way from Jeffersonville, Indiana, to Kentucky. The chase lasted around 45 minutes, but he was eventually caught, arrested, and charged with resisting arrest. But once again, Joseph lucked out because his bail was only $500. And nobody bothered to tell the Utah Parole Board about what had happened, not about any of it. Apparently, right before the chase, Joseph had called the police and said that his family was trying to kill him. The police were worried about his mental state after they caught him, and they sent him to a facility to get looked at. While he was there, he kept asking the nurse to give him a gun. He called himself Zeus, and he was biting himself. Mental health professionals said that he was paranoid, he was delusional. So it was like it didn't matter what Joseph did. He just kept skating by without ever facing any consequences. Nobody cared about his background or the possibility that he might hurt somebody again. I mean, at least not until he started dating Tammy, and now her friends ended up digging into his past to see what his deal was. So we've spent a ton of time talking about Joseph's past, but let's get back to 2014, the year that Tammy and Joseph met, fell for each other, and moved in together. Things in their relationship escalated pretty quickly. But now that Tammy's friends had learned some of the extremely unsettling information about Joseph, they told Tammy, and everybody was shocked by how she responded. See, Tammy didn't seem horrified or surprised. She also didn't try to deny any of it. Nope. She said she already knew about all of it, and even more, she was okay with it. In fact, Tammy was the one who paid that $500 bail amount after the high-speed chase. It happened a few months into their relationship. And as for the fact that Joseph had killed his ex-girlfriend Sabrina and shot his mom, Tammy figured that he was really young and that he shouldn't be judged based on that one little fatal shooting. He just wasn't that kind of person. And it was basically the exact same argument that Joseph's mother, sister, and grandmother all made during his trial, that this horrible act of violence should be treated like a minor mistake. Tammy also said that Joseph was a totally different person now. She thought that the shooting only happened because he was grieving, he was on drugs. But in the years since then, Joseph had gotten clean, he worked hard at his job, he lived each day like he wanted to prove that he had turned everything around. And this might have been a little naive on Tammy's part, sure, but she thought that she was one of the reasons that Joseph had changed so much. I mentioned it before, but Tammy loved helping people, especially anyone who seemed like they were struggling with personal issues. One of the big reasons that she was attracted to Joseph was because he seemed like he needed her so badly. And I'm sure we all have that one friend who dates terrible guys because she wants to save them. I know I do. It's a terrible situation that usually does not have a happy ending, but you can't help them until they're ready to help themselves. And while Tammy had what sounded like good intentions, it also seemed like she was in this relationship for all the wrong reasons. In fact, she even admitted that she was upset when Joseph got arrested after the car chase. It felt like a big setback that they had after they had made so much progress. A part of her still hoped that their relationship would work, but she did have some doubts now. And even though Tammy defended Joseph to her friends, behind the scenes, she really was starting to get pretty fed up. Joseph was insisting that he was this changed man, but Tammy was starting to notice that he still had some violent tendencies. He wanted total control over everything that Tammy did, what she wore, where she went, who she would talk to, and if she did something that he didn't approve of, he would throw an absolute tantrum. And all of this really scared Tammy because his anger was so intense. While he wouldn't physically hurt her, she sensed that it would eventually get to that point. So now Tammy was seriously thinking about leaving Joseph. But there was a new complication that stopped her from ending things immediately. She started worrying about what he might do to her if she broke up with him. And those fears, let's just be honest, they were totally valid, especially because on Monday, September 8th, 2014, Tammy came into work and she was visibly shaken. Her colleagues, who were some of her closest friends, came up to her. She pulled them aside and told them that she just survived something horrific. Joseph had tied her up and had spent the entire weekend sexually assaulting her. She convinced Joseph to let her go because she knew that her coworkers would become suspicious if she didn't go to work. So he did. He agreed. Now, obviously, her friends were upset and they were horrified, and they tried to convince her to call the police, but she refused. Even after all of the deplorable things that Joseph had done to her, she was still thinking in terms of how she could help him. She didn't want him to go back to prison. But at least Tammy recognized by this point that she couldn't stay with him any longer. She was ready to dump him, and all of her friends were completely supportive of that idea, but she didn't want him going back to prison. But at the very least, she was getting herself out of this terrible situation. That's what her friends thought about it. Now, understandably, Tammy was way too scared to go home that night, so she stayed with a friend. That friend also helped Tammy write and send Joseph a text, which read, "You can choose to be in denial about what happened Saturday into Sunday. I won't be in denial. No one gets to terrify me like you did on Sunday. I will never forget as long as I live." But Joseph did deny it. He wrote a reply that said, "We had a great dinner Saturday. Don't let the negative enter your mind. You are my soulmate. Come to me, please. Come home and talk to me, baby." Now let's just talk about the audacity of this reply. He sexually violated his girlfriend, arguably one of the most traumatizing things that you can do to a person. And then he acted like this great dinner on Saturday should make up for it. And then he tried to gaslight her by saying that she was just letting the negative thoughts take over, enter her head, take over everything. Now, I don't know if he actually thought that he could persuade Tammy to be okay with what he did, or maybe he was thinking in terms of not leaving any evidence for the police to find later. I don't know. But either way, this response from him was so creepy and so violating, just building on the terrible ways that he had hurt Tammy already. And then he escalated by showing up at Tammy's work the next day, which was September 9th. He was belligerent and he begged her to get back together with him, actually thinking that was going to work. Now, Tammy wasn't charmed. She wasn't forgiving. She was terrified, and so were all of her coworkers. They told her to go home, pack up all of his stuff, and just get him officially out of her house. And she did exactly that. It took a few days, but she got all of Joseph's stuff into trash bags and then had her dad change the locks so that Joseph couldn't get back in. From there, a few more days went by. Then, late in the evening on September 11th, Tammy called the police to report a domestic dispute at her house. Specifically, Joseph was trying to break in, and he would not leave. The police got there right away, and they found Joseph acting really agitated. He kept going on and on about how officers, according to him, always supported women, which, let's just say, that is a big red flag. Even though Joseph wasn't happy about it, he eventually agreed to leave. Now, just to be careful, the police decided to patrol the area for another hour, just to make sure that he didn't come back. Then, once they felt comfortable that Joseph was actually gone for good, they moved along with their night. But the next morning, Tammy did not show up for work. Now, she was never late, and on the rare occasion that she was out sick or something, she always would text somebody to let them know. So, of course, it was concerning that she was now not at work. She also wasn't responding to anybody who was trying to text her. And then add in everything that had just gone down with Joseph, and everybody right away jumped to the worst possible conclusions. But before anybody could panic too much, one of her coworkers called Tammy's phone just to check in on her one more time. But a man answered. He said his name was John, but Tammy's coworkers were like, who the heck is John? None of them remembered her ever mentioning anybody with that name. Now, by this point, the first coworker had hung up with John, so then somebody else tried calling her. Again, a man answered, but instead of saying his name was John, now the guy said he was Tammy's brother. Except that coworker had actually met Tammy's brother before, and he knew what his voice sounded like, so they knew that this guy on the phone was lying. So that was enough for them to call the police and ask for a welfare check on Tammy. It was still pretty early in the morning. This was right at the beginning of Tammy's shifts, but as far as the police were concerned, the night shift was over and the day shift was well underway. So the officers who had handled the domestic disturbance call the night before hadn't had a chance to talk to their replacements about what had happened yet. So these new officers who came over to Tammy's house had no idea that Joseph had tried to break in just a few hours before. They did see some signs of forced entry, but again, they didn't have any idea of who might have gotten in. When they knocked, Joseph answered as well. But the cops didn't have any reason to be suspicious of him. Nobody had told them that he was Tammy's ex or that he was not supposed to be there. He said that Tammy wasn't home, and I don't know, maybe he expected the officers to believe him, and they might have, except for the fact that they saw cuts on his knuckles. He also seemed really nervous, and when the police asked if they could pat him down, he completely refused. So this was all suspicious enough for the officers to arrest him. So now he didn't get a say in whether or not they searched him, and sure enough, they found a bloody knife inside of his pocket. Then the police went inside, and inside there was blood everywhere. They called out for Tammy, but nobody replied, and the blood formed a trail which led right into the bathroom. There, they could see even more blood inside the tub. However, they couldn't get a good look because there was a tarp covering the entire bathtub. But when they lifted up the tarp, they found Tammy's body. She was dead, and she had huge cuts on her face and on her abdomen. On top of that, part of her skull had been crushed, and pieces of her skull were missing. Her killer had smashed it in such a way that they left little pieces of her brain scattered all around the bathroom. Now, I know that this is all really gruesome, but that's not even the end of it. In the kitchen, the police found a pan and a pair of tongs that were covered in blood and pieces of Tammy's hair, and part of her skull was sitting on a plate on the kitchen table, indicating that what? Joseph had tried to eat part of Tammy, consume her, cannibalism? Now, Tammy's autopsy showed that she had been sexually assaulted and also stabbed about 25 times. Her official cause of death was sharp force trauma, meaning that she was stabbed to death. Besides her skull, some of her organs were also missing, including her lungs and her heart. Which I just have to say, how beyond grotesque is that not not are you murdering somebody, but you are removing parts of their organs from their body. It just shows a whole different level of depravity and disgust and violation, in my opinion. Now, during his interrogation, Joseph confessed that he did break into Tammy's home. When Tammy saw him, she ran to the bathroom. She locked herself inside. But Joseph smashed the door down and then stabbed Tammy over and over again. Once she was dead, he used his power tools to remove parts of her brain, her heart, and her lungs. And then he ate them all. Which, yeah, guys, I told you that this was going to get more gruesome. He started with the brain, which he ate raw. Then he decided to cook her heart and cook her lungs. Now, it doesn't sound like Joseph was thinking especially rationally during this process. Not that I think anybody rational would do this sort of thing to another person, but he said a lot of unhinged things, like that he could hear Tammy's thoughts, or that the Greek god Zeus talked to him, that he had a third eye in his forehead, things like that. He said that he ate Tammy's brain so that he could have her third eye too. And apparently, when he ate pieces of her heart and her lungs, demons escaped from her body. He also claimed that by killing Tammy, he was, quote, restoring the balance. However, at some point later on, Joseph actually ended up recanting this entire statement, and he told another story. Now he said that when he got to Tammy's house, he saw multiple black men inside. One of them was attacking Tammy, so he jumped in and tried to help her, which, how convenient that he just happened to break in, uninvited, just in time to play the hero. Right, nobody's buying it. Joseph then said that the men wanted to eat his brain so that they could have his third eye. He fought back apparently though, but then they knocked him out. When he woke up, Tammy was already dead according to him, and Joseph knew that the men were trying to frame him because they had put the bloody knife inside his pocket. Now, as crazy as this sounds, you're not alone, because the police, they didn't buy this story at all. I don't think I need to spell out why. It's just not believable. We all understand it's absolutely absurd. But just to be extra thorough, they did check to see if there was any evidence of these other attackers, and big surprise, there wasn't. Now, Joseph never actually said why he decided to kill Tammy. However, it seems pretty clear that his mental state was pretty messed up. So he was charged with first-degree murder, sexual assault, and abuse of a corpse. He was denied bail even while he kept claiming that he was innocent.
So, Hansley, anything you'd like to say?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you want to say,
I would
sir?
like to say that all these charges against me and allegations are false. They refuse to give me any bail, any business. Charges and allegations against me are false. That's why they won't let me talk to you people.
What do you say about the death penalty?
They're holding back all my mail. I haven't been able to receive
What do you say
any
about the
mail,
death penalty?
any phone calls, letters, anything. So for all my family and friends out there, you know why I haven't been able to respond?
How did you get the death penalty?
Now, it was pretty clear that Joseph was dealing with some kind of severe mental issue, and it was bad enough that he was deemed unfit to stand trial multiple times. In 2017, a judge ordered him to go to a hospital for an evaluation. Multiple psychiatrists all said the same thing that the courts had been saying this entire time. Joseph was unfit to stand trial. He ended up having to stay there for a year in the hopes that after he had received some treatment, he could move forward and face a jury for his crimes. In the meantime, though, Joseph kept firing and then hiring new members of his defense team because he constantly had issues with everybody he was working with. Specifically, he said that they were putting thoughts inside his head. Now, the obvious move here would have been for Joseph to plead insanity, and that's what basically every single one of his lawyers told him to do, but Joseph refused. He said it would make him look weak and it would prove that he had killed Tammy. But the alternative was for Joseph to face the death penalty, and nobody wanted him to be executed when he was clearly dealing with some pretty serious mental problems. Eventually, Joseph's team worked out a deal with the prosecutors. They said that they weren't going to plead insanity and they would go through a typical trial. But in return, the state could not pursue the death penalty. They could only ask for life in prison. So those terms sounded good for everybody. Everybody agreed. And Joseph's trial began in 2019. Now, out of a desire not to bias the jury, nobody was allowed to talk about Joseph's prior arrests. So basically, nobody was allowed to know that Tammy was actually the second girlfriend that Joseph had killed, or anything about his past trouble with the law. But as we know, sometimes things like that don't work out, and that's not how things worked out here.
Day one of testimony in a high-profile murder case. Joseph Oberhansley is charged with raping and killing his ex-girlfriend, Tammy Jo Blanton, and then consuming her organs. It happened in Jeffersonville in 2014. On Thursday, two women, friends and co-workers of the victim, told jurors the last few days of Blanton's life she lived in fear of her ex and had police on speed dial. But it's the testimony of a third friend that changed everything.
Anytime that word's said in a trial, you know things have just went bad.
That word? Prison. Prior to trial, both sides agreed Oberhansley's criminal record and drug use would not be mentioned. That witness did both, prompting the judge to declare a mistrial Thursday afternoon. Oberhansley's attorney, Brent Westerfeld, called it the right move, but still disappointing.
You feel like you were ready to go, and then suddenly you can't go anymore. So it's kind of very much a letdown.
Clark County prosecutor Jeremy Mole told the judge a mistrial was the best move, concerned the higher courts could strike down an eventual verdict and send the case back to square one.
Honestly, this all sounds like a good deal for Joseph. I'm sure he would have preferred a not guilty verdict to a mistrial, but basically, he got another shot at another hearing where the jury had no idea about his blood-soaked history. Except instead, he complained. He didn't stop rambling about how badly he thought that he was being treated the whole way back to his cell.
Being held illegally, all my family and friends out there do not believe any of this. I'm being held illegally. All my rights are being violated. This is all horrible. I'm being horribly mistreated. They do not allow me to shave. I do not have a brush or a comb to comb my hair.
Joseph went back to the mental facility and his new trial began on September 11th, 2020. This time, everyone stuck to the facts as they pertained to Joseph and Tammy. And there were plenty of facts here, guys. I mean, texts that Tammy sent saying that she was scared, blood from the crime scene, which matched Joseph, and also Tammy's DNA, his confession. I mean, I could go on and on. Then, when Joseph took the stand, he came across as very irrational and unwell. He also told that same unbelievable story that he had told the police, the black men breaking into Tammy's home, him trying to be the hero and rescue her. It wasn't persuasive at all, though, and the jury found Joseph guilty of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. They weirdly found him not guilty of the sexual assault, though, even though his semen was inside of her body. Still, the other convictions were enough to sentence him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Joseph did go on to try and appeal, but it didn't work out for him. The conviction stood. So finally, for the first time in his entire life, Joseph had to face some real consequence, which he could not wiggle out of. However, a lot of pain and heartache could have easily been avoided had any of those earlier charges of his stuck. I mean, the whole reason that Joseph got out after Sabrina's murder was because everybody insisted that he had changed. He wasn't violent anymore. But clearly, that was not true. If it was, Tammy would still be alive. And that's before I even get into those countless parole violations which just fell through the cracks. Nobody ever followed up on them. And Joseph just got to keep living as a free man. And Tammy was the one who paid the price for all of his crimes. She also left behind all of those friends and her family. And they still miss her terribly, even today. And it makes me so angry because they didn't have to lose her at all. There were so many chances for people to intervene and save her. This murder was so preventable. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this case, guys. So please leave them in the comments below. And thank you again for being so understanding about my jaw. I'm hoping that it gets fully back to normal with my speech in the next few weeks, but I appreciate you bearing with me. I was going to take time off, but the more I thought about it and sat with it, I really feel like it is important what we do here. It's important that we share these victims' stories. It's important that their voice continues to be heard and that we continue to raise awareness. So although it may not sound perfect to you, I do appreciate you sticking through and hearing their stories with me. All right, guys, thanks again. Don't forget to check out all of the new merch if you are interested at all. It's at AnnieElise.com. And until the next case, stay safe. Bye.